Good
Good
morning.
morning. Grab a cup and join us as we talk about communication today.
Go hit subscribe and ring that bell, and we'll be right back. I'm Matt, and this is my wife, Maria. We've been asked by friends and family how it is that our marriage works so well through all of life's crazy. Through better or worse, through sickness and health, till death do us part. So we decided to talk about how two imperfect people have been able to create a strong marriage. Welcome to Morning Coffee.
And we're back. So, we got a mid sip. We are talking about communication. Like I said last time on the 5 love languages, I truly believe that communication is my ultimate love language. And we can talk about like what we do. And not saying it's the best way, but it works for us. And talk about why it's so important for us that communication it happens.
I think the biggest thing, the biggest first step is figuring out how each of you communicates the best. For example, the way that I like to communicate events coming up is through a digital calendar on my phone and on my computer. However, my wife is very analog, so she has this calendar right here.
But this is a family calendar that we write everything on, and then I have my planner.
Yeah.
That I write everything on.
So what we figured out to do, and this took actually a lot of trial and error to figure it out, but what we try to do every week is to, on Monday, figure out what's coming up for that week. And then any new big things, like for example, we're traveling in February, so any new big things that came up.
February, March, April, May.
We're traveling a lot, so any big things that came up, we throw those in there as well. We make sure that it's on my digital calendar, which she can also see, as well as her handwritten calendars. And then that one gets hung up in the kitchen, so our kids can see it and they know what's going on. So really the biggest thing first is figuring out how you communicate well yourself. And I guess for what we're talking about here, communication is more about making each other aware of what's going on in our lives individually and then together. So that way we can plan our lives better, we can be less stressed. I think that's the biggest thing that I realized for her was being on the same page just decreased her stress level as far as making sure that everything was getting done and we were being accountable to all of the things that we said we were going to do. But for me, because I spent a lot of my life being the youngest child and then being a child of divorce that kind of drifted and did whatever he wanted to do and wasn't really held accountable for much, I didn't really tell anybody what I was doing. I can't remember until I actually made some friends in my early 20s back in Virginia. I can't really remember ever telling anyone where I was at any given time, unless those people were going to be meeting me later or whatever the case may be. So it was really a huge change for me, going from true bachelor status to trying to communicate effectively with a spouse. And then when we got married, I instantly had 2 kids, so that added another layer of communication into it because we had to communicate on behalf of the kids as well because we couldn't expect them to be able to communicate at the level we knew how to do so. They were still learning at that time.
My turn.
Yes.
So, as he said, on Mondays when we sit down, like literally I'll have my planner, I'll have the calendar, he'll have his phone, and we share a calendar, as he said. We do that so we don't overbook each other, because during the week someone will even say like, hey, can we do a couple's dinner or whatever, and I'll look at the calendar. The answer is always, I need to check with him, and vice versa. However, we can look at the calendar and know right away, like, oh, no, Wednesday doesn't work. We are completely booked. We're free these 2 days, but let me see what works best for him, just in case something came up. the biggest reason for communication for me is I never had to be accountable to anybody either. I just went willy-nilly my entire life. Just I just did me. I'm an only child-ish. I have step siblings, but only had those up until I was 12. So I truly never was accountable really to anybody. I didn't. It became a challenge later on when you need to be accountable to somebody, and you're like, oh, I just thought you'd tag along. Well, then having kids and having multiples, that one was doing martial arts, the other one's ballet, the other one has field hockey, the other one staying after school. So keeping their calendar straight and who can be where, never wanting to miss a game for our daughter. Mm-hmm. So making sure that our calendars were good. So that's where it all started, was just having that communication. But it's even deeper than that, because we as a family, like, our kids never had a curfew. It was communication. This is where I'm going. It didn't matter if they were going to a party, they were going to a friend's house to watch movies. We are going to so-and-so's house to watch a movie. We're watching 3 movies, movies about 2 hours each, da-da-da-da-da. So you'll be done about 1:30. Okay, I expect you home by 2. We're just going to the mall and to get something to eat. Mall closes at 9. You're going to eat home no later than 11. It was just communicate with us and you're fine. If it's I'm going out, well, your out butt needs to be home by 9.
Yep. And actually, that was how my, as I've been looking back and talking with my siblings about how we were raised, that's actually how my oldest sister was raised. She was not given a curfew because she would communicate everything she was doing, when she was leaving, when she was coming back. And I would probably say up until, again, my early 20s, and that my oldest sister was probably the most responsible of all of us. And I think part of that ability to communicate was...
If she's watching, I'm sorry, I'm laughing.
I think that ability to communicate was part of that, being responsible, and probably considering other people's input and feelings regarding your life and what's going on around you. And that brings up another thing. Communication isn't just... There's one side of communication that's making sure you're on the same page with life in general. Then there's the other side of communication, which is sharing what's going on in your life with your partner. And you can also do the same thing, and I recommend doing the same thing with friends of yours. But for now, we're just going to talk about sharing and communicating with your spouse.
Significant other.
Yes.
Significant other.
Yes.
I can pronunciate.
And again, it goes back to how do you like to communicate. But I also think you need to add into there, you have to make sure you don't appear like you're judging your significant other while you're communicating, because that's the first thing that will shut them down and they won't communicate anymore. And honestly, I think that's the thing that I think that's one of the reasons why I knew I was going to marry Maria, because I could tell her the dumbest things that I had done, and while she may have some snarky comment or whatever, she made it very apparent that she didn't judge me for the decisions that I made, and she was just there to be supportive. But so that really created a foundation of wanting to communicate openly.
So can I say my favorite thing about our communication that we do is when we are leaving to go somewhere, we always tell each other bye, love you, kissy kissy. And then when we get there, we let the other person know we're there.
Yeah.
And usually it's like, hey, I'm going out with my girlfriends for dinner, I'm going out with the guys, the whatever. This is probably about the time we'll be back. If for some reason one of us, we decide, like, I have a girlfriend that we can literally sit for 4-6 hours and just talk. And I met with her today, and it was crazy because 2 hours went by, and I was like, I have to leave. Oh my gosh. And we still probably have another 4 hours to catch up on. And when we just text each other and say, hey, I'm still here. Do you need me to come home? It isn't, I'm not asking for permission. It's like, hey, is there something else that I should be doing? Is there something you need me for? But I'm checking in because he's expecting me. I don't want him worrying that, hey, she's due home because this is the time she told me she'd be home. And now he's worried because I'm an hour late. Granted, he would have called me by then, like, you okay? And he has literally called her, texted, and been like, everything all right? Still good? But I am just thankful that we have that relationship that we can just check in with each other and be like, hey, I'm still here. And it's not a permission thing. And I feel like so many people feel like communication is a permission.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. I have constantly, I won't say constantly, frequently, I hear young men, especially newly married young men, who complain about having to ask permission from their wife to go somewhere or hang out with the boys or whatever the case may be. And I think there's a lack of understanding that you're not really asking for permission. She just wants communication from you. But on the flip side of that, there tends to be young women, especially newly married, that when the man does not live up to some sort of communication, rather than sitting down and having a non-judgmental conversation about it and communicating properly, they either blow up about it or they just go complain to their girls or whatever the case may be. Guys do the same thing. The two will then separate to their corners and talk to their friends about how frustrating the other person is, and then come back and not ever resolve the situation between themselves. That's the complete wrong move, and essentially they don't realize that the people that they're going to complain to, they're not the people that they're going to spend the rest of their life with, or that whose opinions actually matter. It's important that the communication, the real communication, happens with your significant other, and that you guys don't judge each other as you have the conversation. Just like us, we grew up not really understanding what communication means because we've never really had to do it. So you have to give each other a little bit of leniency when you're having these types of conversations.
Especially in the beginning, I didn't know how to properly communicate. My communication was many octaves higher. It sounded something like yelling, but it's the way I knew to communicate. I thought that was how to communicate what I was feeling. I didn't understand talking it out. So then the octaves higher, he taught me how to talk and communicate and what I was feeling and all that good stuff, which is next episode, which is year one, and how I said we had 6 fights ever. First 4 were in the first year. And it's due to communication. Literally, it's due to communication and my lack of knowledge of how to best handle some situations.
I will say, though, that I kind of was at the other side of that pendulum where she had very loud communication. Because of my temperament and how I was raised, I tended to have no communication. When we were friends, she remembers times where I would just fall off the radar for days at a time, sometimes weeks, and just not communicate with anybody. And that was just who I was. So it also took some training for me to be able to communicate at all and understand that other people need me to actually say out loud the things that are going on inside my head.
Yeah.
As crazy as they are, because everyone's crazy. Just be okay with the fact that you're crazy, your significant other is crazy, everyone is crazy to some extent.
There's just different levels.
Yeah, just be okay with that, and when you sit down, just be okay with letting each other see the crazy. It's just, you're going to be with each other forever, you might as well be okay with the crazy.
I once told Sierra, I said, Sierra, let a little bit of the crazy out at a time. Don't let him see it all. She said, no, he needs to know right up front what he's getting into. And I'm like, eek.
I agree, and he knew, and
Now they're married.
So
Yeah. I don't know. So there was a break in between this, and you'll notice because the camera's tilted. So I don't remember everything we said. We had a malfunction with the camera. It happens. But anyhow, I don't know what else to say. If you have questions, want to know anything else on communication and how we do it, and
hang on. So I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I just want to emphasize and re-emphasize the concept of not judging each other while you communicate. That's the biggest thing that keeps couples from figuring out how to communicate properly. And also be careful what tendencies you take from your past and from past relationships with you. In a lot of cases, like in my case, my tendency to not communicate was based on the relationships I saw around me as I grew up, and her tendency to communicate loudly was based on the relationship she saw when she grew up. So maybe before you go into sitting down and having a true open conversation about communication with your significant other, you kind of look at the relationships you had around you and figure out what they did well and what they didn't do well, and take the things that can help you and leave the things behind that are going to hurt your relationship moving forward. And just don't judge your significant other as you go through this. Neither of you are perfect, so just accept that and move forward and help each other to get to where you need to be together.
so it's funny. We even went through marriage counseling, and even during marriage counseling, like, we communicated great. Like we have said, we were best friends for years, so we knew how to talk to each other. It was, and we talked about the deep stuff in marriage counseling, like who will handle the finances, who will do this, who will do that, and we were good. It was, I think the everyday task of things never actually got talked about. Like, who will, I don't know, who's going to make breakfast? Who's going to make the coffee? Who's taking the kids to school? And I will talk about that stuff later, and how awesome he was, because he literally made breakfast and lunches every single day. He's awesome. Anywho, I think that sometimes when we're communicating, we just assume that the other person knows things.
Yep.
And that's where we make the biggest mistakes, is assuming. Because I assumed, since we were best friends for years, he just got it. Like, that's Maria. Everything's fine. It's just going to stay the same. It didn't stay the same.
But that actually goes into our first year as well, so we'll talk a little bit more about that in another episode. So
yes. So I think that's it.
Yep.
So make sure you always love yourself
and love each other.
and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.